Collabinar. This time we're talking about student feedback in Folio, and we have Cathy Hall and Doug Parsons from the Episcopal Academy in Philadelphia joining us. And I want to thank Cathy and Doug at the beginning for all the work they've done to prepare these slides and prepare this presentation. And for those who were not able to make it in person, we're very excited about the recording going out and look forward to really continuing the conversation on what we all can learn about student feedback in Folio. So without further ado, I want to turn it over to Cathy Hall and Doug Parsons to take us through their presentation.
Great, thank you, Tim.
Thanks, Tim.
And welcome, everyone. We're happy to be able to share what we have learned. We're quite honestly kind of part of the way through our own journey with student feedback, but really with Folio in general. At Episcopal Academy, we're finishing year 2 of Folio implementation. And our first year was a pilot year for us, where all of our data was private to the teacher, and we're in our first live year. So we've learned a tremendous amount, certainly, and expect to have a lot more growth in the next couple years. But we're going to share with you some of the ways that we're set up, some of the things of student feedback that we put in place to try to be as effective as it could be, and some of the changes that we've made along the way to kind of try to make that more effective for us. We're going to start off talking about what we had in place before Folio. Because something that might be a little bit different about Episcopal than your school is we did have student feedback in place as part of our previous evaluation system. It definitely made it easier. It was a bit of a no-brainer for us to continue to include student feedback as we went into Folio. I know for other schools, if you've never solicited student feedback, that culture shift alone is probably pretty dramatic. Before we did Folio, we had a 4-year evaluation process, which was pretty cumbersome, very paper-heavy. There was a student survey component to that. We also used student feedback really on an as-needed basis. So, for example, if there was a teacher who was going through some probationary process, we might use it actually a couple times during that, or we might have used it to kind of shore up someone's confidence in something that they were doing. And it was somewhat similar. We used student feedback as a survey tool. We had an open section. But what's really different about it from what we do with Folio is it was very disconnected from really a broader process. The student feedback was never really brought into the fold of classroom observation, annual conversations. So it existed, but it certainly wasn't systematized in the way that we knew it needed to be in order to make it more effective. But that is an important underlying point, and we'll talk a little bit later about the challenges and what we recommend in implementing student feedback. And without question, if your school's never had that in place, you need to approach it a little bit, probably more delicately than schools who have had a history of doing that.
Okay, so I'm going to talk about the process of our student feedback in Folio. And I'm going to have to ask Cathy for I want to say one more thing about our previous system, but I'm going to ask Cathy to help me because she's been here longer than I have. It was my understanding that we only did student feedback in the old system in the upper school. Is that correct, or did we also do it in the middle school?
That's great. Yeah, we actually really did just primarily do it in upper. I think we did it in middle as well a little, but again, it wasn't consistent enough to even really kind of, I think, put it in that bucket.
Okay,
yeah.
so one of the big differences is that we are now doing, and Cathy's correct, we did have a culture to some extent of feedback. But we are now doing 3rd grade through 12th grade. So that, in some ways, that's been a big shift for us. We've never, as far as I know, we've never done it in the lower school, and maybe only sporadically in the middle school. So that's been one of the big changes. And of course, now we're doing it with every teacher and every coach every year. So every year, actually, it's the basic rule of thumb is once for each course, once for each season. That's for all coaches, upper and middle, at all levels. The basic timing of the student feedback, as a general rule of thumb, students give feedback about midway to 3/4 of the way through a course period or through a season. So I'll break this down a little bit more specifically. For full year courses, middle school does their student feedback pretty much right in the middle of the year, January and February. Upper school does it a little bit later. We do student feedback in March and April. In fact, we just extended a deadline, so it's actually going on. It's going to go on even longer. It's going on until the end of April. to some extent, this is a question of lab space. Every class needs to get in there, and at the same time, there are teams getting in there too, and I'll say more about that in a minute. But because of that, because of the lab space, I think we'd like to have everybody go bring their students into the lab for student feedback in the middle of every course, but it just logistically, it's not possible for us to do that. So in a way, with middle school and upper school, middle school goes first, and then upper school follows, and it takes about 6 weeks to get all the classes through. So it's basically 6 weeks for middle school in January and February, and then 6 weeks for the upper school, give or take, in maybe late February, March, and also early April. Lower school has their own lab set up, and they begin their process in the middle of the year. They, for various reasons, are going on. They've carried their period on much longer this year than the other two. Just at basically 6-week window. Lower school is still going on. Their deadline is now extended to May 3rd. I think they're going to address, our lower school head is going to come up with what she hopes will be a more efficient system. We really would like teachers to get student feedback, with some time left in the year. I mean, one of the ideas about doing it at the beginning or in the middle of the year is that you can get some feedback and you can make some adjustments based on what those students are telling you for the second half of that course. Now that the students know you and are invested in the course, you're getting feedback at a time when you can really implement some things that can enhance the experience for the students. So I think just as a philosophy, we'd like people to get student feedback in the middle, but for logistical reasons, it's been hard to do. Yeah. So that's the basic rule of thumb for the academic side. For coaches, basically take their teams in the second half of the season. And this really varies. It's a wide open window, and some coaches like to do it right in the middle of the season, but with the athletic schedule, it's very difficult to do. When you're playing 2 or 3 games a week, it's very hard to give up practice time in order to take students into the lab. I will talk more about the importance of giving up practice time in a little bit when we talk about some of the nuances of how to prepare students for feedback. So some coaches do it in the middle of the season. A lot of coaches, to be honest, tend to do it in the last couple of weeks of the season. It gets to the point where they either have some downtime in the season or it's playoff time, and they are just taking a down day or like one of the last available times in order to get their teams into the lab. But again, so we hope that coaches are getting their teams in the middle of the season, but there's a wide open window for them because and I should say too, I mean, their time is really compressed because the last half of the season really means about 4.5 weeks tops. That's much smaller than the window on the academic side, which is really a minimum of 6 weeks.
And one of the things at the timing that becomes an issue if it becomes too condensed from the student perspective, especially with classes, they can end up getting in the lab 7 times in a row to do feedback on teachers. I think it was Tim who kind of coined this term of folio fatigue, and we definitely find that with our students. And once we make it live, they can technically see actually all of their courses. There are a couple of little glitches around getting that spread out. I mean, in an ideal world, we would kind of have them doing 1 course a week over the course of, say, 7 weeks, and not kind of being in the lab or on their computers almost every day doing it for teachers. I don't think they're quite as thoughtful on the 7th course as they are on the 1st. And we're trying to kind of sort those kinds of nuances out so that the feedback feels valuable and teachers don't feel like they're just kind of quickly clicking through and not giving, thoughtful feedback.
And I think we found, just looking at our timeline, the problem that Cathy is talking about is most acute right in the middle of the year when we're doing winter sports and middle school's going in. So the middle school kids often going in and they see 7, they're going in every week, and they're not supposed to do all the forms. But what they're seeing, they're going in and they're seeing 6 classes plus their sports. So they're seeing all, and they know that they're going to be doing those in, once a week more or less in the coming weeks. So this idea of folio fatigue is an issue, and we haven't found the perfect solution yet, but it's one we're aware of and we're thinking about. Yeah. Okay, so that's the timeline. In terms of what do the students see when they log in, what does the form look like? We followed the advice that was in the original folio handbook, and we followed what McDonough did with us. So basically, the student feedback form is in 3 sections, and we've tailored it to our own needs. But the first 2 sections are slider sections. The first section is what we call core, what the Folio Handbook really calls core value words. And there, we have 9 of them, 9 words, and there's little descriptors after those words. And they're words that we feel are core values to our program and our experience at Episcopal. And the students are asked to slide on their teacher, on their coach, as to how challenging they are, how inspiring they are, how reliable is not one of the words, but something like that. How responsible they are in terms of carrying out their their duties as a teacher or as a coach. So that's the first section. Second section asks more specific questions, but again, this is a slider section. The questions are things like, my teacher returns work in a timely manner. My teacher always tries to help me to do my best work. Kind of similar on the coaching side. My coach is aware of my abilities. My coach tries to help me play my best, those kinds of things. And then the third section is a narrative comment box. And we have kind of a generic prompt. And this is one of the things we're thinking about addressing, because the generic prompt, while leaving it kind of wide open, I think we feel that maybe, especially middle schoolers and some of the younger kids, need a little bit more focused with the prompt. I think the prompt is something like asking students to give 2 examples of explaining or illustrating a question that they've answered in the slider section above. I try to, and again, I'll get into some of the nuances of this in a minute, but just as a general, I try to encourage people to tell the students to write at least 2 bullet points, really 2 sentences, 2 different sentences with giving 2 different quality points of feedback, whether that's constructive criticism or just simply praise for what's good or whatever it may be. One last thing I'll say, because this was a question about the forms. This is a question that came up. We have the same form school-wide. And one of the questions that came up last year was, is the form age appropriate for 3rd graders? 3rd graders don't necessarily know what innovative means in terms of what a teacher should be doing as far as fostering innovation. So we actually have, well, I should say the reason that we have a standard form across grades is because then the data is standard. Everybody's being evaluated on the same data, and there's, as you know, in Folio, there's different ways, or you may or may not know, but there's different ways to compare feedback data. I, for example, can compare myself as an upper school English teacher. I can compare my data to other teachers in the English department. I can compare my data to other teachers in the upper school. I can compare my data school-wide, and we wouldn't be able to do that if we had a different form for different units. I think we wanted to have it to be, we wanted a synthesis, so we wanted everybody to be on the same scale. That said, we understand that the prompts and some of the wording and terminology and so forth in the form is a little tricky for younger kids. So we have kind of a supplementary form, which teachers are supposed to either read through or give to their students when they take their 3rd graders or 4th graders into the lab to do student feedback. And these are basically, it's translating the adult language of the actual form into more kid-friendly language.
Yeah, and the teachers in particular are the ones who have complained about the form not being age appropriate. And we're going to talk a bit about teacher anxiety around student feedback, and in the lower school, that's probably one of the #1 concerns. It's just, if the form is not appropriate, then on what basis are the kids evaluating teachers, and how does that come back to kind of haunt the teachers if the kids are misunderstanding the prompts? So there's been a lot of dialogue around that, and I think we're going to keep tweaking that as we go along. Move on in. So what do we do ahead of time? The student preparation piece is absolutely essential. And in year 1, we definitely had some sort of rogue student comments, particularly with athletics. We had some coaches who had not prepared their kids. The kids went into the lab and made some just inappropriate comments, nothing egregious, but stuff that upset the coaches. And in most cases, we really found those students hadn't been as well prepared as might have been effective. So Doug, as the Folio coordinator here, has been putting out for teachers and coaches a really helpful script that many of them are using. But in our lower school head actually has taken the charge. She thought it through, felt like from the student perspective, it'll bring a weight to this. It'll help them. She's using this as an opportunity to teach the students about the importance of giving somebody feedback in general. And for many of them, this is the first time they've ever given feedback on any level. So she goes into each class ahead of their feedback session and has a PowerPoint that she runs through. And it really talks to them not just about folio again, but really just about how we give constructive feedback, what feedback means, how someone can use that constructively. And then she's got some tips for them that she's found are really, really effective. And we haven't had really any issues out of our lower school beyond what I mentioned with the teachers. But in the middle and upper, it's really up to the teacher and coach. And Doug just continually reinforces this need for teachers to spend some time with their class, kind of talking through, hey, let's review kind of what we've done this year. Let's talk a little bit about what you're about to kind of head into. And for some teachers, that felt like they were self-promoting. And I think initially they felt like they shouldn't say anything to the kids, just sort of throw them in the lab and they'll figure it out. But more and more have gotten on board with really prepping the students effectively. And as Doug said, really giving them some pointers on how, what they can say that's going to be helpful. We're going to talk in a minute about some of the pitfalls of all of this and some of the student feedback concerns that we've had and some comments. But is there anything to add on this one?
Yeah, just to say a little bit more about what we do to prepare the students in order to get quality feedback. I certainly learned a lot in folio camp that first year, and to be honest, I should probably, in the stuff that I use, I should probably have attributions, because I'm sure that I took stuff from Meredith Monk, who I know does a super job with preparation. I probably took something from the folio handbook. We have a teacher here who came up with a script, and I think I took some things from that. So I've taken bits and pieces, and I probably should do a better job. I'm not a historian, but I should do a better job of attributing. So I'll go back and do that at some point so that I can give people credit where credit is due. But there, I've at least mentioned a few names. So Kim Pearsall is one here whose script I took from. Just to make a kind of general comment, I can't stress this enough, the importance of this. And I mentioned this at the Folio Collaborative last June, and I won't be there this June, but I'll say it again when I get the chance. The more you can ritualize the process of taking the students into the lab to give you feedback, the better it's going to be. Problems arise when you don't ritualize the process. We had problems with coaches last year who did not dedicate practice time to taking their kids into the lab. What they did was they said, oh, hey, you guys got to do folio tomorrow. Why don't you just make sure you go through the lab before you come to practice so that's all done? And then as it turns out, they did not get quality feedback, and you can understand why. You need to show the kids that it's important. And the way you show the kids that it's important is by talking about it ahead of time and talking about its importance ahead of time. I would say even more in advance of the day before, although certainly the day before, you should be, I mean, this year when I took my students in a few weeks ago, the day before I took them into the lab, I mentioned a few times leading up to that point, but before I took them in, I reserved the last 5 minutes of class to give them a little speech about why I thought it was important. And then, of course, when you get in the lab, you need to set up the process. And the way I did that was, first of all, and I'm just giving you some basic ideas about how you can ritualize the process. Things you can say that kids will hear. Now, maybe I'm talking about upper school kids, so you might have to tweak this for some of the younger kids. But things that you can say that kids will hear that will kind of tune them up so that they'll take it seriously and invest and give you quality feedback. One of the things that I say, I always lead off by saying, I've been giving you guys feedback all year on your essays. I write those comments, or I type those comments, and you've seen that. In class, I tell you when you've made a good insight, and I tell you if, well, no, I give you feedback all year on everything you do. And in doing that, I have always tried to be fair, logical, consistent, and constructive, even if I've been critical. And I asked them, do you think that raise your hand if you think that that's a good way to give feedback. And of course, all the hands go up. And maybe I'm shaming some kids into raising their hands, but all the hands go up. It's okay. If you have your hand up, that's great. I want you to give me feedback tomorrow in the same spirit. We really try to stress that this is a privilege that we're giving the kids. It's a privilege to give the kids the opportunity to give us feedback and then make changes or adjust what we're doing based on what they're telling us. So just as a general philosophy about how you need to approach it, ritualizing the process. Can't stress that enough. That is the most important thing. As Cathy was saying, our lower school head, I think, did a lot to prepare teachers and prepare students and get them involved. I know our middle school head has been very good about any time there's feedback window is going to open for a course. Our middle school is on trimester, so they actually have 3 times a year they're doing the academics. They're doing it in the 3 seasons, and he's been very good about making an announcement in chapel. Okay, it's going to be time to be giving folio feedback again. I want to remind you that this is a privilege and of the importance of this. Teachers really want to hear your quality feedback. I mean, our middle school head has been very good about that. But it really does need to come. I think that message needs to come from the top down, and the students need to hear it a number of times throughout the year, and not just from their own teacher. But finally, as I was saying, teachers need to give this message. Coaches need to give this message, both leading up to the lab session and in order to set up the lab session properly. I've lost my train of thought. Do you want to help me out here? Well, let's go on to the next slide.
Let's go on to the next slide.
Okay.
So on a teacher preparation side, at the end of the day, to really get teacher buy-in, that having student feedback is meaningful, is worth the stress it causes some of them, you really have to live it. And we're about 3/4 of the way through living it. So we're actually in the midst of a lot of anxiety here. And I think until you've gone through those summary conversations at the end of the year, until a teacher can sit down with their supervisor and in front of them have maybe some kind of off student comments, and have the supervisor actually roll that constructively into a conversation where the teacher isn't dinged and doesn't feel that it was held against them inappropriately, there's probably going to be some underlying anxiety until you can really live that through, because we've been reinforcing it over and over and over again that the student feedback is going to be a constructive part of dialogue and isn't a gotcha system. But I think even here we have teachers who are still kind of holding their breath a little bit. And I heard something as recently as yesterday. Someone said, well, they got a couple of funny comments from kids, but rather than saying anything, they want to kind of wait, and they're hoping their supervisor just doesn't see them. I mean, there's that sense from some teachers, and I think, really living it successfully is your best way to build confidence and faith. And I really feel very strongly that once we've gone through maybe even 2 years of that, certainly the first year, I think next year we will not be hearing the levels of anxiety and stress around student feedback that we're hearing this year. There's really no better way or no other way to replace that level of it. The piece in our second bullet point here, the mean comment thing, is without question kind of what is our topic of the day here at Episcopal, and it only takes one bad comment to throw a huge number of teachers. The teachers all talk. We did this spring have, earlier in the winter, had a student in the middle school make just a horrible, horrible comment to a teacher. It was very immature and didn't mean what the kid probably wrote. It was, again, a middle schooler, but the ripple effect of that bad comment has been tremendous. And what's been good about it is it has really prompted us to talk through a lot how we're preparing kids for the feedback, why we find such value in it, because there will be some mean comments, and you can't have one mean comment mean that you pull student feedback down or make it non-anonymous. I think there are probably some ways we can continue to get better. Doug talked about that open-ended prompt. We can probably narrow that a bit more. But I really do think, again, when the teachers live through the year and realize that a silly mean comment from a kid isn't going to get a teacher in trouble. It's just not how we operate, and we're very willing to dismiss it. That we can get through. The piece that's the struggle, and we're going to talk about in our last 2 slides here, is the impact on faculty morale and self-confidence, and some of our teachers who just struggle deeply with getting critical student feedback, even constructive student feedback, and particularly when it's mean and personal and sometimes cruel. Some people have a really, really hard time swallowing that. Even if the supervisor says, hey, don't worry about it, no big deal, for some of our teachers, it's a very big deal, and it's something that we've been really trying to help support people through. Because as you know, in schools, we don't have a culture of critical feedback. For many teachers, this is the first time in their lives they're being told something critical about their work, either from their peers or from students. And for many, that's just a life-altering process to go through, and it's a very emotional and a very personal process to go through. So our advice kind of as you go through this is, number one, to just expect you're going to have, no matter what you do to prepare, you're going to have some outlier comments that are mean, where teachers are going to feel hurt, and you need to have some plans in place to support them and to talk through as a team how you're going to handle, what are your different tiers and how do you handle it. If a comment's just sort of silly, last year we had a few of those, silly and mean, you can ignore them. But what if it crosses the line and seems threatening to the teacher? What if the comment is so out of bounds, it violates huge parts of your institutional norms? Making sure you've had those conversations ahead of time so you know how you'll respond as an institution, and you can tell your faculty how you'll respond as an institution. And that's what we've been working through. What can we communicate out to our teachers so they feel they've got the support of the administration, and we're making it clear how we will act in the face of a threatening comment. At the end of the day, that helps us all get more on the same page and be a better team. You want to add anything to that?
Yeah, and I remembered what I was going to say a little while ago, so I'll go back to that in a minute. But just to add to what Cathy was saying, and maybe I'm being very rosy-eyed optimistic here, but I believe that this is an opportunity for administrators and supervisors and their faculty to enhance trust and communication, because up the supervisory chain, they're seeing whatever those negative comments are and are going to be having a conversation with those teachers about those negative comments. And when teachers see, oh, not only am I not going to get fired because some student made a negative comment about me, but my supervisor is amazingly supportive, and my supervisor has amazing perspective and has really helped me to deal with negative criticism better, or whatever. I think those opportunities are possible in a way that they wouldn't have this if you weren't forced to have the conversation about the negative student feedback. Now, I'm not saying we're there yet. But I do think that over time this has the possibility of enhancing trust and improving communication. I think it also means that teachers are going to have a better sense of what their administrators are thinking of them. Yeah. Instead of going on kind of wondering all the time. So I think it really can enhance both communication and trust.
So, the key word that Doug said was time. And, when we had this one incident recently, we did have a lot of people calling for us to just absolutely pull student feedback. And I had a handful of emails that said, this is clearly the indicator that we shouldn't be doing this. Let's pull the plug on this. We should all just agree this is a terrible idea. And being able to push through that, I think it takes time, because once those trust relationships are established, people will be a lot less jittery about one comment, but we're not there yet. And I think all of us in the administration feel very, very strongly about the value of student feedback, and we're going to list some of the benefits we see in a second. But the last point here on the pilot year gets to some of this. I think part of the trust building can come, unfortunately, I don't think you can separate out student feedback from the rest of folio to go. So unfortunately, it's either all public or not. We benefited from implementing it first year. So the first year we did folio last year, the student feedback was blind, and we as supervisors only saw it if the teacher brought it to us. And what was neat was many of them did. And Doug would have, the dean of faculty would have a teacher come and ask for his advice, or they might go to their division head or their department chair. So it put it on them to say, look, here, we're going to give you the student feedback. You can kind of swallow that and process it. And if you want some help, if you want somebody to sit down with you and go through it, we're here to do that. And that puts it on them to really seek and reach out to get that. And it shifted the dynamic a bit. Now, of course, folks are still anxious this year, but I do think that if we had just launched right into live student data, I think the anxiety levels would have been a lot higher. So if you're looking to add this to your program, I don't know what your options are, but you might want to consider having that be a year where you go to a blind state across the system to then go live again the following year. You'll probably build a lot more trust. You'll lower anxiety, certainly, especially if you've never had student feedback in your school. I think it would go a long way with lowering the anxiety level as you work out the kinks in the system. And I'm going to list in a minute some of the importance of logistics being right for this to go well.
And just to add one more, I completely agree. Just to add one more data point, I probably had 20 teachers and or coaches last year come to me kind of really upset about student feedback that they got for one reason or another. No one has come to me this year. And now that's not to say that there has been, it's not to say that people are not upset, but I guess what I'm saying is, I think Cathy is right. If you have the student feedback visible up the supervisory chain in your first year, it is going to compound the anxiety.
Yeah.
But the thing is, once you get through it for 1 year and teachers and coaches start to get the message about ritualizing the process and have had 1 year of practice to do it so that they can get better quality feedback, by the time it becomes live, the feedback they're getting is so much better that it just helps with the buy-in, and people see, oh, okay, this really isn't the problem I thought it might be, or thought it was going to be. Whereas all of that would be compounded if it were visible up the supervisory chain in the first year.
We should probably choose other 2 points and have them move to the next 2 at least.
Okay, can I go back? Can I go back to that one thing really quickly? I'm going back to how you prepare the students for the lab session really quick. Not only do you have to prepare them ahead of time, you also need to follow up. It is crucial to follow up by talking with them, your class or your team, after you see the data about some of the key threads or the key themes and what you're going to do about it, what you're going to change or how you're going to act on them, so that they feel like it wasn't just a wasted exercise. It's also important to have that follow-up afterwards. But
the key to that, this is the interesting thing, is I think the teacher who's most successfully able to do that is the one who's probably over that hump of feeling that the data is all personal.
Yeah.
Because actually, I think in the ideal scenario, all of our teachers have that approach, which is this is really constructive feedback. I can be retrospective and think about how I can shift something and now go back and communicate to the students. For some of our teachers, there's no question they're not there yet. And that feels they're still kind of stung or wounded by even some of the smallest critiques about their teaching style, or they get things back late, or whatever it might be. And we need to coach them through that. I think as we go through this process over the next several years, it's one of our jobs is to help coach teachers on how to do what Doug just described. Because I think when we have all of our teachers doing that, we've probably won the day with student feedback, because it means they're seeing it as meaningful feedback, they're incorporating it into their reflections on their teaching practice, and they have the self-confidence to then present that back to the students. So admittedly, we probably have some teachers doing that and others who would rather set themselves on fire than get in front of the kids and admit what they're doing is wrong. So it's a mixture. We're going to quickly go through, and this will be very quick, the positive outcomes, because most of this is so intuitive. I'm sure it's why you're all considering doing student feedback. The idea of it being a really useful conversation tool, Doug talked about that. It's obviously critical. For teachers who are struggling, the interesting thing is teachers initially think if you're using student feedback, it's because you're trying to catch me. You're trying to prove that I'm a failure or prove that I've got trouble. And actually, we have found in the last couple of years, in most cases, doing these surveys actually reinforces many of the positives. Most of the student feedback is positive. Even for teachers who aren't our best teachers in the classroom or have some weaknesses, or the students aren't zinging them everywhere. And so we actually can pull that data out and say, look constructively at what you're doing well and where your students are praising some of the stuff you're doing, and it makes it actually look a lot bleaker. It's often a very constructive tool to help support those teachers. We've actually had some cases, our head of school loves this story, that he was able to really support a coach when a parent came in recently and said, oh, I hear everybody think such and such about the coach, and being able to really pull up actual data of what students have said about that teacher or coach and use it as a way of supporting that teacher and saying, you know, you're actually the outlier. The other 90 people who were surveyed on this person found them to be very, responsive or whatever it might be. I think at the end of the day, it will get used more in that way to support teachers than not. And again, I think that helps build the trust a lot as well. And then this idea of, just teachers being able to reflect. There are so few ways for teachers to get meaningful feedback from the people they're there to serve. And this really does provide that, most effective way to do it. We're also going to just very honestly, this is probably sort of some of the meat of what we need to share with you, talk a bit about our challenges. And I touched a little bit on the insecurity piece, and it's actually probably one of the most pivotal pieces for me. And I've had some very painful conversations with teachers. I've had teachers in tears, talking very candidly. I've one say to me very openly, I've been teaching for 30 years, and this has made me question whether I'm doing the right thing. I think for teachers who have already probably some deep insecurities about what they're doing, have never gotten feedback, helping them get over that hump and not take this as a personal assault. Even, she said to me, even constructive feedback, I'm having a really hard time moving past. And we have a bunch of teachers who fall in that boat, and I'm sure you do too, where even a general critique about a teaching style, a general critique about not being very responsive. For many, they will ruminate on that for months. And it really is imperative that the supervisors are trained in how to then have those end-of-year conversations in a way that helps free them from that stress, so that at the end of the year, they should not be going off to the summer carrying the weight of critical student feedback with them. They should feel they have an action plan. They should feel that it's turned a corner. But that's an ongoing challenge, and that isn't the bulk of our faculty. I would say most are okay with what they're getting, but there are some who definitely fall into that bucket, and we need to keep working with. And then, as I mentioned, that the random mean comment, it definitely has a ripple effect, and there are many teachers looking to kind of do the aha, I knew this was sort of the wrong way to go. And there are some who are sort of polling other teachers to say, have you heard of anyone who got a mean comment, and trying to kind of come up with evidence that this is just going to be a terrible way to get feedback. And so we keep wrestling with how much we do survey tools, how much do we keep asking teachers. We have a reporting system. If a teacher gets a mean comment that they think is inappropriate, they're meant to tell their supervisor, and we can handle it from there. But
I'm sorry, I want to jump in here. We very consciously decided that our feedback was going to be anonymous, and we have the possibility of narrative feedback from 3rd grade through 12th grade. There are other possibilities. One of the possibilities we discussed was not offering the narrative comment box to anyone younger than 9th grade. We also talked about the possibility of trying to find a way to, either through the system or just by having kids sign their name, to make the comments not anonymous, but have them be attributed so that they would be quote unquote more responsible. But we're at this point committed to the philosophy that students are going to be more forthright and more honest and more direct if we give them the opportunity of an honest. They know there's not going to be any repercussion for any critical comments they may make. And so we're really committed to this idea of being anonymous. But this is going to be one of the things you're going to want to talk about. Yeah. And as I said, anonymity isn't the only option. We do offer the narrative comment box that right down to 3rd grade. Where kids in 3rd grade might be saying things like, I wish we had more cookies or something like that, you know what I mean? So you have to decide if those are the right options, what the right options are for you.
Yeah. And then the technical errors piece, we have had some glitches, and it's often things that we're just learning as we go, some of the things that we needed, boxes that we need to check, things we need to do. Most recently, we had in our winter season with middle school, we hadn't flipped a switch in the system, and when the coaches brought their teams in, the students actually saw the teacher form, and it got fixed pretty quickly. But what ended up happening was there were some teams that got in there and basically entered teaching data for the coaches, which wouldn't seem like a big deal, but what's risen up is those coaches who are also teachers are now anxious that their data is clouded. And well, if the students left the slider down to the far left, and that's getting lumped in with my overall student data, is it going to skew my results, and will I be held accountable? And it seems kind of ridiculous. So we keep saying, my goodness, it's like 10 kids, and why would we ever do that to you? But the anxiety is very real, and we've been having to kind of back off from that. So doing the pilot year the first year will also help you tweak some of those things. We had some timing issues last year that we've resolved this year. To the degree you can be seamless the year that you're live, you will significantly lower anxiety, because the teachers will latch on to that as any reason that they think they're getting skewed data or they're getting misperceived as being something, that'll definitely cloud things a little bit.
Yeah, God bless the middle schoolers. They saw that it was the teacher form and thought, well, okay, I guess I have to fill this out.
Yeah.
And nobody said anything. So they were all filling out this teacher form, and it'll be a question like, my teacher always returns homework in a timely manner, and they would think, well, actually, we don't have homework in sports. So they put the slider all the way down to never. So if you think about that in terms of the fact that that's a teacher form, and that's going to be added to their other data, it's going to really pull the other sliders down. So I mean, this was the technical problem that we faced.
Yeah. I think we've covered the other pieces, that the live year is obviously critical, and then Doug talked about the anonymous versus open feedback, which he's right. You need to have lots of conversations in your school community about. And I don't think my video link is going to work. Melissa, do you think it's going to work?
No, I'm sorry. I wasn't able to bring it over.
Oh, it didn't matter. It was sort of probably on time anyway. We'd love to open it for questions, either spoken or typed or whatever works for anybody. We're happy to field questions.
This is Tim Fish. I'm just going to follow up on a few points that I think Cathy and Doug made, I think, very convincingly. And from the experience at McDonough, we're 1 year essentially ahead of Doug and Cathy in terms of general student feedback, but we're in the same place in terms of the use of the current folio tool. I could not agree more with the points they made about student preparation and about creating a ritualistic, I like the way Doug presented that, a ritualistic approach to having students doing that feedback. And also the notion that you have to be ready for when those comments come in, because they certainly will. But we have found over time at McDonough that the anxiety has really begun to go down, and that the usefulness is going up. But I would not say for a minute that it's gone, that the anxiety is gone, and I also wouldn't say for a minute that it is something that that people have, purely have gotten to a, sort of pure sense of usefulness. There's still, I think, teachers out there, if you polled at McDonough, who would say they don't think it's a very good idea to be doing this. A couple of the things that have come up recently for us has been that the tool doesn't allow for the teacher to customize the question to meet his or her specific personal goals. And I think that long term, that's something that we as a collaborative want to really think about, in order to allow greater ownership on the part of the teacher for the questions that are being, at least some of the questions being asked. The other thing we found is that those value words core value words that Doug talked about that everyone is assessed on, it's really important that a school think about what those words are. And so to give an example, we originally had the word joyful because it's in our mission statement. It's something we believe very strongly in. And as teachers talked about it, they really said, should I really be assessed on how joyful I am and how happy my personality is? Or is it really more how much kids are learning? And we had a great conversation on that and ended up pulling joyful out, actually, because we felt that there are times where teachers will say, it's not my role to be necessarily particularly joyful, but the long and short of it is you could debate whether or not it should be there. But we really tried to more and more bring these questions, particularly the teacher questions and the coach questions, back to the work that person is doing in their classroom or on the field as a sort of focus point of the question. And then I think the last point I would make is that something we've looked at is how much it's very important to still keep the emphasis on the conversations, because feedback, particularly when you're doing it like Episcopal is or like McDonough is, where we do it first grade through 12th grade, there's a lot of logistics that go into managing the feedback process. Making sure all the data is imported, making sure that everything's right, getting the kids in the lab, all those things they mentioned. And it can have the tendency to distract from the power of the conversation in general. And so it's important to really keep the focus on that and try to keep feedback in balance with the larger folio objectives, I think. So that would just be a few things that I would throw out and open the floor up to anyone else who has comments or questions.
This is Josh at Culver, and I have a question about the comparisons. How did you set up group comparisons, and have you found them helpful in the conversation? Are there pitfalls to doing that? How has that worked for you guys?
Tim, I'm going to let you answer that because I think I could be wrong. I think we're just using the default comparisons, right?
Yeah, so I think you are. Kim, do you have any comments on that? Kim, may not the way we go ahead.
I was going to say at Episcopal, the only thing I'll add is, we do have, to varying degrees, people who've used the built-in comparisons, just looking at themselves compared to their peers around. We definitely have heard stories of people who have found that to be useful.
Yeah.
I haven't heard any negative examples of people using the group comparison tool. I think for the most part it reinforces that they're doing a good job. Yeah. I don't think anyone's looked at it and said, oh my gosh, I'm so far to the left. We haven't heard that happen yet. So it's been a positive thing for us.
Yeah, I would agree, Josh. It's been something that there has not been a lot of negative stuff on at McDonough, and because of the way it only shows you the aggregate of the comparison group, there's really no way of ever telling what one person in that group may be doing.
Right.
So you're never comparing to an individual. And I think that part's actually worked well, and people have found it to be very helpful. I imagine that having looked at the data myself, I imagine that there are people who are uncomfortable with where their bar is placed, their comparison bar is placed in comparison to their department or their division. Because there have been times that I've looked at data where there is a significant difference between the peer group and the person, and I think that is something that people sometimes may have, some personal kind of like what's going on there. But I've also would echo that it's done a lot to open the door to conversations with people, and I think that's one thing that's really important.
Any other questions?
The only other question I'd ask is just a general one. There are those set questions in Folio that you can choose from, and then the set adjectives in Folio. Is there a way of comparing across the collaborative?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's something that we'd always talked about, Josh, and we have not yet built that, but there was in the core of the database that if you chose one of those global words and did not edit it at all, that we did build a database structure where that would be eventually possible, but the code to actually make it possible is not currently possible. It's not currently there.
Great.
Yeah.
Hi, this is Kathleen. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
My question is, we're not using the student part yet of Folio, but I think we're definitely moving to it next year. We do have a culture where every year students do give paper feedback to teachers, so I think the culture is already there to accept it. Is there a way to see a sample of it before we make our decision to go there with Folio?
Yeah, Kathleen, this is Kim Fanto.
Hi, Kim.
Yeah, hi. Yeah, if you want, we could schedule a phone call together, and I could show you on the demo site. We could walk through some examples, and I could show you what it looks like.
Okay. You know what? Next week when we're in school, I will give you a call and set that up with Patrick Lynch, our tech director, too, so that he's there and can walk through it with you. That would be great. Thank you.
Yeah, that would be super.
Kathleen, what school are you at?
Marymount in LA.
Yeah, wonderful. Great. So I just want to take a moment, if there's no further questions or comments, to again thank Cathy Hall and Doug Parsons for all the work they did preparing for this and for putting this this wonderful presentation into the collaborative. I think that people who were not able to be here will absolutely appreciate this presentation, and I think it's something that we will be able to use for a long time to come as schools are asking questions about student feedback and whether or not they should do it and what things they should think about relating it to it. So I just want to thank Alyssa for setting this up and Kim for everything she's doing as well to support the work, and apologize for the late start, and want to thank everyone for coming. It's been a wonderful, wonderful hour together, and I appreciate all the work.
Thank you, Tim.
Thank you all.
Thanks,
everybody.
Doug.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye. Bye.